We hear or see almost every day that there is murder, kidnapping, sex trafficking taking place. Heinous and horrific crimes being done. Is there any justice? No. My name is Chloe Clark, and today I'll be teaching you guys why the death penalty should not be abolished. At the end of my presentation, the audience will have the knowledge on the death penalty. The death penalty has many pros as to why it should not be abolished, including justice for families, prevents prisons from becoming overpopulated, zero chance of escape, and deserved punishment for horrific crimes. Now, we see or hear almost every day that someone has committed a heinous crime. It is left with families and cities devastated. The crime rate has increased in Florida since 2018 by almost 2%. That's high. I have researched and studied cold cases, unsolved murders, crimes, and mysteries for about 3 years now. And since my dream is to become a forensic psychologist, I think I am well educated on the justice system and the death penalty. There are many things to know about the death penalty and the pros that go with it, including justice for families of the victims, prevents prisons from becoming severely overpopulated, which has been a problem since 2014. Zero chance of escape, and deserved punishment for the horrific and heinous crimes. Now, to begin discussing the death penalty, let's talk about why it is a good idea to not abolish it with justice for the victims' families. Now, justice is a word we all know far too well. When we hear or see a case of someone being murdered, beaten, kidnapped, etc., we all think of justice. Now, let me explain. Ted Bundy. Who here has heard of Ted Bundy? A name we know all too well. He murdered more than 30 women and escaped from jail twice to kill again. 7 innocent women were murdered because they did not use the death penalty right away. It made him America's most notorious serial killer. All 30 of those beautiful women had families, children, spouses, and friends who loved and adored them. And all 30 of those women, their families wanted justice for the heinous crime he committed. And what happened? They let him escape not once, but twice. To kill 7, maybe even more, innocent women. But because they did not execute him right away like they should have, they failed those families. Justice is something that we need as human beings, as mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers. For example, knowing that your daughter's murderer is still breathing air, just sitting behind bars, still eating, still getting to drink water, read a book, while your daughter is 6 feet under the ground. Is that justice? Justice is something we do not hear too often, though. Oftentimes, a lot of people will commit a horrific crime and just get a slap on the wrist, while the victim and their families have to deal with the pain and sorrow for the rest of their lives. Ask yourself, is that justice? And if you think so, for who? The death penalty is justice for many victims and families. To say the death penalty needs to be abolished, take a look into Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy. They murdered thousands of people and did not even feel bad about it. The death penalty was justice for their victims and their families. They did not feel bad about it. Ted Bundy specifically said, "If you let me out, I will kill again and again because it makes me feel good." And he did. We heard about how important justice is. Now let's move on to overpopulation prisons. The death penalty prevents prisons from becoming overpopulated. Now, prisons that are overpopulated has been a problem since 2014. We have also heard that many prisons have become overpopulated due to high crime rates. Ask yourself, what could stop high crime rates? Just think about that. As I mentioned earlier, just in Florida alone, the crime rate has gone up almost 2% instead of it decreasing. With overpopulated prisons, you have no room for more prisoners to come in. Overpopulated prisons can cause lack of privacy, which can result in mental health problems for prisoners, health problems, and increased rates of violence inside the prison, self-harm, and suicide. If we use the death penalty as it should be, these issues, such as overpopulated prisons, would not be happening. Some murders that have done horrific crimes just to get to stay in general population, while other people who just have a drug charge are on death row. Some murderers have done more than just horrific crimes. Heinous, brutal crimes, and they have never gotten the death penalty. I want you to think about this. Someone who dealt drugs and got caught, they get sentenced to death. It has happened. While someone else murdered an innocent human being and just gets life in prison. They still get to eat. They still get to drink. They still get to breathe the same air as everybody else. And they get to die in prison. While you have somebody else who just got caught doing drugs and they get executed. Is that justice? Overcrowded and overpopulated prisons is becoming a huge problem that started in 2014. If we gave the right people the right sentencing, including the death sentence, would we have accomplished a change in overpopulated prisons? Now, we learned about overpopulated prisons can become dangerous for the prisoners inside. Now let's move on to a zero chance of escape. Now, the death penalty can help with prisoners escaping prison. Before I explained, I know that Ted Bundy did escape twice from prison, but that's because they did not execute him as soon as possible. He was smart, conniving, manipulative, and he played all those cards. And it got him to go and kill 7 innocent, beautiful women. Now, is that justice? No. Today, escaping prison when you have the death penalty is going to be extremely difficult, rather than if you were sentenced to life or just 20 years in prison. When you are on death row, when you are sentenced to death, you do not get to leave your prison cell. You don't get to go outside. You don't get to go to the cafeteria to eat. You have to stay there all day, 24 hours. You are being watched at all times. You cannot escape. It is rare that we hear of anyone escaping prison, but it does happen. Look at Ted Bundy again. He escaped twice and went and killed more innocent people. We need to use the death penalty the way it should. The death penalty isn't a bad thing. It is a thing for bad people, for murderers, and for people who have done horrific and heinous things. If we abolish the death penalty, it would just be another chance for these murderers to escape, like Ted Bundy did, and kill again or just never be found. Families and the victims need justice, and I believe that if we did, in fact, abolish the death penalty, the justice for those victims and families wouldn't at all be fulfilled. Now, we talked about people who get the death penalty and they have a zero chance of escape. Now let's move on to the final point, and that is deserved punishment for horrific crimes. We hear on the news of gun violence, murders, kidnaps, school shootings, public shootings, sex trafficking, child sex trafficking. what would it be? What would satisfy you then with their punishment? If you heard that a child, let's say 50 children, just got picked up from a sex trafficking ring and they found the sex trafficker leader, what would you want their punishment to be? 30 years just for them to get out and do it again? Like I said, we want justice for the victims and their families. Now I want you to ask yourself another question. If someone murdered someone you loved, what is justice for you, for them? What would you be satisfied with as their punishment? If they did not get the death penalty because it was abolished, would you be okay knowing that they were still sitting there, breathing, sleeping at night, reading? No. While you have to stay up all night and wake up the next day knowing that your loved one is 6 feet under and you're grieving every day. Our lives are so valuable. So when someone is innocent and they get their life taken away from them, we need to show them with justice just how valuable our lives are. If we abolish the death penalty, I have no doubt in my mind that the crime rate would double, maybe even triple. We need to stand firm that people who are willing to do horrific crimes gets the punishment they deserve. In my eyes, you take a life, you give yours. The suspects deserve a punishment for a horrific crime, which always, an option, should be the death penalty. Just like the victims and their families deserve justice, some families and victims will never get that justice because some states have the death penalty off the table. There are only 29 states that have the death penalty. But for the remaining states left, if we used it as justice, I think personally the crime rate would go down significantly. And don't we all want that? Don't we want to live in a world full of peace and happiness? We shouldn't have to be scared to leave our house. I shouldn't be scared when my daughter starts kindergarten. Now that we have learned and discussed the death penalty, let's conclude. The death penalty needs to be used for justice and well-deserved punishment for people who choose to do horrific things and crimes. If we used it more, maybe the crime rate would go down drastically. And that's a world we want to live in. I hope that after learning about the death penalty, you can make the decision that it is important to have that for an option for justice. And that we can use that so that the people that unfortunately have to fight for justice, who had to fight for their life, do not have to fight hard. Before I